everyone wants to know how long it's going to be until Jesus returns. It's a question we can't answer exactly because God just didn't say anything about Thursday, July 21st of the year 2022. But that doesn't mean we don't know anything. We can do quite a bit with the information that God has and get some sort of a reasonable idea of things to look for in the way of events, and that can give us a starting point that we can use to get a number to understand when Jesus is going to return from that point. So that's what we're going to be doing here. We're going to be looking at how long, in that context of finding the earliest possible physical event that we can identify, and from that event to the time that Jesus returns. And so that's going to be our approach here. There are some prophecies where we know the beginning and the ending of that, the events that are going to happen there, and so we know how to link those things together, and they have specified time links with them, and or else there's a very reasonable estimate you can come up with that can be made for that, because things like that have happened in the world before. And so we can take these events and link them together into a sequence. And we're going to be doing that here. We're going to look at two different sequences that we can come up with. One is based on events, and one is based really more strictly on prophecy. And so these two sequences that we're going to look at are going to give us a minimum time for how long it will be after we see the earliest event occur, because there's going to be some slack in there that we can't really estimate for, and you'll see that as we go into it. So the earliest prophetic event that we have that we can work from is Ezekiel's battle, which comes with the sixth seal. I have a video on that, and I'll put a link here for you so you can look back at that if you want to. But Ezekiel's battle is really the first major physical event that we can say, okay, yeah, this is the starting point here, and from here we can start measuring things out and get a time. So really our goal here is going to be to answer the question, how long from Ezekiel's battle until Jesus returns? And that's where we'll get to. Okay, the first path we're going to look at here, there's going to be two paths. The first one is the sequence of events path. And so this is mixing together the idea of events that are talked about in prophecy with our understanding of other things that will happen in the world because they've happened in the world before. And so let me get my laser pointer out here. Okay, so in this sequence of events, everything kind of starts with the collapse of the current world order. And don't take that in the wrong way. I'm not talking about this new world order thinking. I'm talking about there have been changes over time in the world ordering, the way the world works, and that has happened many times in the past. And so what there's going to be, and we know this from Daniel's statue. Daniel's statue talks about a change from what is essentially a Roman-based world to what is called a 10-toed world. 10 toes, like toes on a foot. And so the collapse of the current world order is something that has to happen to make room for that new world ordering to happen, the new world order with the 10 toes, the 10 heads of the government, of the world government. And so that collapse is one of those things that has to happen. And we've seen collapses like that happen before, and so we can get a pretty good idea of how long it takes from the collapse until the establishment of a new order to replace the old order that was there. And the most recent one of those that happened was after World War II. What happened was the result of World War II was a whole bunch of impoverished European countries who had spent themselves into debt defending themselves against Hitler and the Germans were impoverished as well because of all the bombing that had gone on back and forth. And so all of these European countries were impoverished, and that left the U.S. to be the one who kind of moved up the middle among them and became the world currency, and everything was kind of centered around the U.S. from that. And so that Bretton Woods Agreement, as it's called, was the agreement that established that new world order that came after the Second World War. And that really changed the financial order of the whole world, and that still is in place, although not exactly the way the Bretton Woods Agreement had it set up originally. So we can say, and that process happened pretty quickly after World War II. The first parts of it happened very quickly, and it kind of was fully established after 2 or 3 years. So we could say that any kind of collapse of a previous world order and an establishment of a new world order really has to kind of take place over a period less than 3 years. And there's good reasons for that too, because the world is kind of in chaos during those transitional periods, and people are suffering because of that. So it needs to happen pretty quickly and be done with. So we know that collapse has to happen. We know there has to be this new world order that happens, and that we can sort of give a 3-year number on. Now comes a gap. There's a whole bunch of things happening in this time gap here. We know from prophecy that these are going to happen, and some of them overlap. And so one thing that has to happen here is this new world order has to become fully established. It has to gain power and control over all the world. And that's going to be a difficult thing to do to get it fully established. Daniel talks a little bit about how that's going to happen. And so after that, the Antichrist begins to appear, and Daniel also talks about that. He talks about this new ten-toed world and the Antichrist coming up in the middle of it. And so the Antichrist appears after that initial establishment of the new order, and he begins to take control of it and change it, and he begins to build his organization. And then the Antichrist eventually starts doing wonders. The Bible talks about him calling down fire from heaven and things like that. And so the final phase of that is that he's going to be doing things that are absolutely amazing and stunning to people. And so all of this is happening in this gap. But in parallel with that, another thing has happened. Not long after the New World Order is established, Gog, as described in Ezekiel, recognizes that Israel is now defenseless. They have nobody to support them. Right now, there are a couple countries that support Israel and are a necessary support for them in the UN and things like that. But there won't be a UN anymore. There will be a new world order. And the new world order is not going to be an Israel supporting new order. And that's hardly a shock because currently almost everybody in the UN hates Israel. And there's just a few countries that support them, the US among them, Canada off and on, and Australia off and on. So even now, that support for Israel is a little bit flexible and weak. And what's going to happen and is going to be recognized is that this Gog, as he's referred to in Ezekiel, is going to recognize, hey, Israel is defenseless. Now is my chance to act. And he's going to start building up a Muslim army to attack Israel. And I have a video on this as well on Ezekiel's battle. I'll put a link to that here as well for you. And so, so what happens is Gog realizes that Israel is defenseless. He makes this attack on them. The attack is destroyed and wiped out all of the forces. And so those things both happen. The whole series of the New World Order being established and the Antichrist within it. And then in parallel with that, Gog realizes this and makes this attack. And the Gog attack probably happens very early in that gap, because there's a whole bunch of things that has to happen after that. So as I was talking about, that takes us to the point where Israel is defenseless, and Ezekiel's battle happens. And now after that, a whole bunch of other things has to happen. And some of these will happen in parallel too. And so this was an Islamic attack. All the countries listed in Ezekiel that are attacking Israel are Islamic countries, and their forces are completely wiped out. So the Islamic world has to rebuild. And so there's going to be a period of time that rebuilding happens. And we know that that's important here because there's just no doubting that the Antichrist is linked to the Islamic world. There are all sorts of things, Islamic prophecy among them, that make it pretty clear that there is some linkage there. And so what also happens at the same time is Israel. They need to rebuild from this attack. And one of the things that they need to do is this big cleanup of all of the dead bodies. And Ezekiel actually describes that. He says it takes 7 years for Israel to finish cleaning up all of the dead bodies from that attack. And so, but another thing happens at the same time is it's become worldwide aware that there is a God, because this just couldn't have happened in any other way, this defeating of this attack on Israel. And so the world is aware that God exists. And along with that is all the Jews from all the other nations say, oh, there is a God, and he is still the defender of Israel, and they all head back to Israel. So a whole bunch of things are kind of in a transition because of this Ezekiel's battle. And so that's kind of why it's a major effect that we can see when it happens. And this is really what starts the clock that we can start measuring from Ezekiel's battle. So Ezekiel's battle happens, and then the next event that kind of ends that period that we can measure. Now we can actually start to put measurements on these things. Is that the Antichrist comes on the scene as that person who is doing wonderful, amazing things that no human has ever done before, and doing all these wonders. And we have a number from that. It's derived from prophecy. I won't explain how it's derived, at least not in this video. Um, but this gives us a 20-year minimum period. So from Ezekiel's battle, which is also in prophecy, until the Antichrist comes on the scene as a being who is doing wonders that no man has ever done, that's a 20-year period there. So that's that one we know pretty well. And so the next thing that we can, next linked is we start from that Antichrist on the scene and to the point where the Antichrist is going to allow sacrifices on the Temple Mount, or actually just the allowance of sacrifices on the Temple Mount. And we know, we don't know that one. That one is, as events, we can't really estimate that one. There are, in the other path, the second path, we'll talk about a number that will give us something for that, but we can't do that here. So just as events, we can't say how long it would be from the time that the Antichrist comes on the scene until sacrifices are allowed on the Temple Mount. So that's a bit of, we don't know there. And so some additional time needs to be added in here, a time that we don't know the length of. Okay, but from the time that the sacrifices begin on the Temple Mount, that one we have a rock solid number on until the second coming. We know that that one is 7 years. Prophecy is very, very clear on that one. So we have this information here. We have a sequence of events. We have some understanding of why things are happening and how they're happening. And we can throw in estimates for numbers. We have a 3-year estimate for this one. This is a good number, but it's derived in a complicated way from prophecy. And this is a rock solid number here. And so we can say, taking just those numbers, that we've got 30 years, but more than 30 years, because we don't know what this is, and we don't know exactly how long this gap time here is. It could actually be a fairly short period for this gap. This one could easily be a little longer period of time, but we just can't even throw in a reasonable estimate on that one. Okay, so we know at least 30 years from the collapse of the current world order. And so all we need to recognize is that collapse of the current world order, or the reestablishment of the new order, which happens pretty quickly after that. And so that gives us a time period there of 30 years. So all those events that I just described are on this slide here. You can go back and review all of those if you want to do that. So now we'll look at the second path, and this path is done entirely differently. This is done entirely from Revelation, and it's based on the idea that the trumpets in Revelation mark out 3.5-year periods, and there's really good reasons to believe that, which I go into in another video. I'll put the link up here for that one as well. And so, but the seals that come before the trumpets, the sixth and seventh seal, we have no reason to believe there's any time period associated with the length of seals. We can only guess on that one, but we have good reason to believe that trumpets are fixed 3.5-year periods. Okay, so this one again starts with Ezekiel's battle, which is a sixth seal event. That's what the sixth seal is talking about, and I have a video that talks about that one. So, so the time from the sixth seal to the seventh seal, we have no clue on. The seals, as I said, don't really seem to have fixed durations with them, and there's no reason to believe that they would have fixed durations. So that one is a bit of a guess, but I think we're talking about a very short period of time there. There's no real reason that there should be a delay there for Ezekiel's battle. Once Ezekiel's battle is a quick event. It's an attack. The attack is destroyed and it's done. So why wouldn't you move directly to the seventh seal? So it may be a very quick, a very short duration there. Okay, so from the seventh seal to the first trumpet, we do have a number. That's the same number from the other slide. It's that 20-year prophecy-derived number, and that gives us the start of the first trumpet. And then each of the trumpet periods are 3.5 years. So the first to the second is 3.5, the second to the third is 3.5, the third to the fourth, 3.5, and so all of those. And so this other method of using these trumpets as our measuring stick will give us a number that isn't all that far, bearing in mind, not all that far from the other slide, the path 1 estimate, and because we don't have that gap in there that we knew that there was a number, but we couldn't estimate that number. If we use this path here, this method, instead we get a number that's got less gaps in it. It only has this one gap. And so that number gives us 41, more than 41 years from Ezekiel's battle until the second coming. So what we've done here is we've gotten some kind of an idea of the time frame. We don't know from now because we don't have that Ezekiel's battle event or either that or the collapse event that has to happen, the New World Order reestablishment event. So once we have those, then we can start applying these numbers more rigorously to our lives and start measuring the time out. But as we stand right now, we're sort of waiting for those events to kick off, and those will really be the things that make it possible. But what we do see here is that it's not an immediate thing. We know that there are at least 40 plus years, maybe a little longer than that, until the second coming. And so there's no reason to think that the second coming is an imminent event. It is just not. And there's a video on the imminency idea as well. So we know that unless we are currently at this time in our early 30s or younger, there's not a good chance we're going to see the second coming just because of our age. Now, God can do whatever he wants, but it's unlikely based on ages that if you're 30 or 40 years old now or older, that you're going to see the second coming. And just being a Christian, that's an unlikely event because of the things that happen in all of these different trumpet periods. So, but it does give us kind of an idea, a number that we can say, because we can honestly say that a lot of these things are pretty imaginable. Now, Ezekiel's battle is quite an imaginable event right now. There's a lot of people who are the enemies of Israel and would like to conquer Israel. And also the collapse of society. Boy, that looks like it could happen any day now. So that's a possible very soon thing. So we can say that the second coming is not that far away, but it is still 41 plus years or more. Either one of these numbers is kind of an estimate on that.